Okay, let's dive in. We've got this really interesting collection of sources here, articles, forum posts, blogs, all sorts of things.
Yeah, quite a mix. And they all get into some pretty specific areas: personal development, how people interact, social dynamics, stuff often linked with terms you might hear like seduction or game or Looksmaxxing.
Right. So our goal today really is to unpack what's in this material for you. We want to pull out the main ideas, the core techniques and perspectives that are actually being discussed in these texts.
Think of it as a shortcut. We're trying to give you a clear view of the methods and viewpoints inside these sources, highlight some interesting bits, maybe some aha moments described within them.
And this is really important. We need to be crystal clear up front. We're just guides here. We're looking at the information inside these specific sources.
Exactly. We're not endorsing anything. We're not adding our own opinions or info from outside, purely reporting on the concepts and techniques described in the material we have.
And critically, we'll be steering clear of any explicitly sexual content. The focus is squarely on the methods, the perspectives, the dynamics as described in these texts.
Okay, so where do we start? A lot of this material seems to build from the ground up, focusing first on the self.
Yeah, definitely. There's a huge emphasis on improving physical presentation. Some sources actually call this Looksmaxxing, right?
That's the term used, yeah. And it's presented less as just looking good and more as a kind of foundational strategy. It covers a whole range of things.
Like the basics: clothing, physique, hair, grooming, but also digging into how you walk, how you talk.
It gets surprisingly specific, like advice on choosing facial hairstyles, not just based on preference, but on how they supposedly create certain aesthetic lines or affect your perceived jaw structure.
Yeah.
Almost like technical drawing,
Yeah, kind of. And then there's other stuff mentioned, like mewing. Saw that in one source.
Right, mewing. Described as a specific way of holding your tongue in your mouth. The source claims it can help with things like posture, maybe even making your voice sound deeper, strengthening the jaw and neck muscles, affecting your profile, basically.
The range of physical topics is pretty broad. They touch on discussions around perceived physical size, referencing certain devices, but always, strictly focusing on the claims within the source about visual appearance or size outcomes, not getting into the devices themselves.
And even personal care routines get detailed. Specific recipes for bath salts, soaps. I think I saw a carrot mask mentioned for oily skin in one place. It's all framed as part of this very deliberate, active approach to your physical self.
It's not just about how you look in person either. Online presence is a big deal in these sources too, especially photos.
Oh yeah, very specific advice there. Use a mix of photos, apparently. Have one that's maybe a bit silly, shows personality.
Group photos are good, they say, especially with friends who look good, but they warn against anything that looks too much like a couple shot.
And this idea of voyeur shots photos, where you're not looking right at the camera, the source suggests it looks more natural, more relaxed.
The bottom line for all the photo advice seems pretty straightforward. Just curate an attractive online image. That's the goal presented.
Okay, so that's the physical side. But just as important, maybe even more so in some of these texts, is the internal stuff. Mindset, emotional strength.
Right. A lot about maintaining a positive outlook, cultivating a feeling of abundance, like you have options and aren't desperate, and focusing on bringing value to interactions.
And a really key concept seems to be detachment. The idea is not to get too invested in the outcome with any single person, especially early on.
Viewing interactions more like screening. Like, are they actually a good fit for you? Less pressure that way, maybe.
Yeah, that's the framing. And what about setbacks, like frustration or rejection?
The advice seems pretty consistent across the board. Channel it into action. Don't sit around overthinking it. Just, get back out there and interact more. Build resilience by doing.
It seems very action-oriented. One source put it quite bluntly: confidence and nervousness aren't things that just happen to you. They're states you create with your thoughts.
So the technique is basically catch the insecure thoughts and actively replace them with positive ones, consciously shifting your internal dialogue.
Some sources also get into defining their view of manhood. Concepts like having your own purpose, your own passion, goals beyond just seeking approval from others.
Yeah, this idea of wanting to win in whatever field you choose, and also not walking on eggshells in how you communicate, being more direct, perhaps.
There's a simple but kind of profound point in one source, too. You need internal peace to have external peace. It starts from within.
Makes sense. And learning from your mistakes, analyzing them, owning them, It's presented not just as good sense, but specifically tied to becoming a better man in the language of some sources.
And there was that one really unique perspective drawing on Taoist ideas.
Oh, right. About cultivating self-love first and connecting energy within yourself. It mentioned managing internal energy, specifically cultivating feelings of love and kindness internally as being key for emotional control and for being a good partner. Sort of internal energy work.
Interesting stuff. Okay, so that really covers the foundation, the focus on the self, physical and mental. That seems central to a lot of this material.
So now let's shift gears. How do these sources talk about actually engaging with other people? The communication, the strategies, what they often call game or seduction.
Right. And often these terms, game or seduction, are presented not as some kind of magic, but more like a structured system, almost a science, some claim, with repeatable methods designed to get predictable results.
They definitely contrast this with, just winging it or relying solely on traditional courtship ideas. It's presented as more analytical.
One source laid out a model, the seduction triangle, remember that? Fundamentals, the look stuff we talked about, vibe mentality, the internal state, and the game skills, the actual interaction techniques.
And the claim was, you need competence in all three for consistent success, right? Like a three-legged stool.
Exactly. Now, a really common strategy you see mentioned across different sources is the numbers game.
Ah, yes, the volume approach.
Pretty much. The core idea is simple. Approach a lot of people. Don't get fixated on success with any one person initially. The main goal is just to initiate contact, maybe get contact info.
And the reasoning given is twofold, it seems. Increases your chances just by sheer volume, and crucially, it gives you tons of practice. You learn and get smoother through repetition.
Get you desensitized to rejection too, maybe. Just part of the process.
Now, when it comes to the actual communication, the sources get really granular, super detailed techniques.
Oh, absolutely. Everything from how to tell stories effectively, how to use humor strategically, to
asking specific kinds of questions, ones that elicit emotion or reveal personality, not just facts. Using clever phrases, sound bites, they call them sometimes, and really paying attention to your voice tone.
The underlying goal described seems to be making the other person feel certain emotions and perceive you as, well, genuine, witty, confident, whatever the desired impression is.
And it's not just words. Nonverbal stuff is huge in these texts. Body language, obviously, but also this concept of frame control.
Right, frame control. Basically, managing the underlying social dynamic of the interaction. Who's leading, what's the context, that sort of thing.
And reading cues from the other person, like how they physically react if you lean in closer.
Yeah, and that ties into the strategic use of touch, what some sources call Pinot. It's presented as a tool to build connection, rapport, comfort. There's advice on timing, how to initiate, when to pull back.
They even mention avoiding dragaways.
Yeah, that's a specific term used. It means, like, literally, if you touch someone's arm and they physically pull it away sharply, it's presented as a clear signal that you've maybe moved too fast or they're uncomfortable, and you need to dial back the physical contact, the feedback mechanism.
Okay, so that's face-to-face. What about online? Texting, apps?
Different ball game, different strategies needed, according to the sources. They talk about using templates for opening lines, maybe.
Yeah.
But making sure to personalize them.
Sticking to a plan for the conversation, taking the conversational lead, keeping messages relatively short and punchy.
And understanding the online environment. Right. Recognizing that the other person likely has many options, many conversations happening at once, so you need to stand out, keep things moving.
Even phone calls get broken down. There's advice on the best time to call, sounding confident, getting to the point quickly.
Having a clear objective for the call, like setting up a meeting, and keeping it fairly short. One source suggested like 8 minutes. Enough to connect, but leave them wanting more. Keep the momentum.
Okay, so beyond the mechanics of communication, what about planning interactions like dates?
Location, location, location. Well, location and activity choice. Presented as really important strategic elements.
They give examples, right? Coffee, dinner, movies. But also more active dates like mini golf or bowling.
Oh, yeah. And there's usually a rationale provided. Coffee's simple, good for conversation. Dinner's more investment. Movies, maybe less talking, more shared experience. Action dates can create fun moments, maybe more opportunities for that natural physical contact, the keynote.
It's all quite calculated the way it's presented, even down to scenarios like, what if the person you're interested in is already in a relationship?
Yeah, there are specific techniques described for that situation too. Things like ironic self-deprecation, maybe subtly painting a picture of what things could be like with you in the future.
Using false disqualifiers, saying something that suggests you wouldn't be a match, supposedly to lower their guard, and always maintaining that non-needy vibe.
It's complex stuff. One source even suggested setting explicit personal rules for interactions, like how you handle phone calls, claiming the structure actually earns respect.
Okay, stepping back again now. Let's talk about the bigger picture, the sort of context and underlying worldview that seems to inform a lot of this material.
Yeah, it's useful to understand where some of this comes from. One source directly discusses the manosphere, describes it as this, wide-ranging online space with lots of different groups and viewpoints.
They mention MRA's men's rights activists and MGTOW men going their own way as examples of groups within that broader sphere. And apparently, building credibility within that community is something discussed in the sources, too.
And you often encounter the term red pill perspective.
Right. What's the gist of that, according to these sources?
It's often presented as drawing on ideas from, say, evolutionary psychology, or offering alternative interpretations of social dynamics, relationship patterns, compared to what they might call mainstream views. One source even mentioned red pill women's blogs existing within this ecosystem.
Interesting. A recurring theme seems to be predictability.
Yes. A strong undercurrent in some sources is that human behavior, especially around attraction and relationships, is fundamentally predictable, generalizable even.
And the idea that actions some might see as manipulative are framed differently?
Right. Framed more as just logical steps. A series of logical actions and behaviors to get a desired outcome. One source literally called understanding these dynamics common sense.
Which connects to another core idea presented, that everyone, men and women, primarily operates based on incentives and self-interest.
Understanding that cold rationality, as one source put it, is presented as key to navigating interactions successfully, according to their framework.
Okay, so how does this perspective play out when they talk about relationships and marriage specifically?
You see a range of views. Some sources are highly critical of modern marriage, suggesting it's rigged against men, or describing it in economic terms like rent-seeking.
So critiques, but also advice.
Yeah, advice on how to identify partners who fit their specific criteria, advice on managing existing relationships, or even when to cut your losses if things aren't working according to the principles they lay out.
And the sources offer pretty distinct perspectives on women's behavior and motivations, don't they? We should be clear, we're just reporting these views as found in the material.
Absolutely. Ideas like emotions being the primary driver for women's attraction, sometimes characterized in the sources with terms like childlike responsiveness. Views on how women supposedly react differently to certain communication styles or behaviors.
And concepts like honesty, or particularly hypergamy. How is that framed?
Within these sources, hypergamy is typically described as a tendency for women to seek the perceived best partner available, or to trade up in relationships over time. Again, just focusing on the behavioral description as presented in the text.
Okay, and similarly, what about the perspectives on men's behavior and challenges, reporting strictly from the sources?
There's a lot there too. Critiques of the stereotypical nice guy approach, often contrasting it with what they frame as a more effective jerk archetype, specifically in the context of generating attraction.
Discussions about pressure, men might feel pressure to perform, to constantly earn affection. The difficulties some men might have moving on from past relationships is mentioned.
And a huge emphasis, which we saw earlier too, placed by these sources on men needing to develop strong confidence and take the lead in interactions. Again, these are the perspectives presented in the material.
So navigating all this, the sources acknowledge it's complex, right? Dealing with the modern dating scene, maybe information overload from all these different ideas online.
They do,
Yeah.
But the constant thread, the solution offered again and again is, well, it's ongoing self-improvement. Keep learning, keep adapting, and most importantly, keep taking action. Don't get stuck in theory.
One source talked about needing a new paradigm, questioning older, maybe outdated ways of thinking about relationships inherited from the modern era, as they put it, to better handle today's social world.
And just to round it out, there's that one source that touched on romantic love, described it quite poetically, actually.
Oh yeah, how so?
As this state of deep absorption in the other person. A unique feeling of being truly seen and understood, connected specifically to personality alignment, not just attraction mechanics.
Interesting nuance there. Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We really have.
Yeah.
We started with that intense focus the sources place on building the self, The physical optimization, the Looksmaxxing stuff, and equally, the internal work on mindset, confidence, emotional resilience.
Then we moved into the strategies for interacting with others, the communication breakdowns, the nonverbal techniques, physical interaction or kino, online methods, planning dates, the whole game or seduction toolkit as presented.
And finally, we looked at the bigger picture views found in these sources, the context like the manosphere, the red pill ideas, the perspectives on predictability, rationality, gender dynamics, and relationships, always aiming to present these impartially, just as they appear in the texts.
Right, this was all about exploring the ideas and methods within this specific collection of material, reporting on the concepts themselves without getting into the weeds of explicit details.
Exactly, just laying out what's there.
So here's something to maybe think about, based on everything we've just unpacked. These sources put a massive emphasis on predictable patterns, on strategic interaction, on techniques designed to elicit specific responses. It makes you wonder, in our own connections, our relationships, how much is driven by those kinds of dynamics, those learned or maybe even inherent techniques, and how much comes down to something else entirely, something perhaps less easy to pin down or strategize.